Hello, my name is Joe Van Wyk and welcome to my podcast. You are watching Screenplay Essentials. This is episode 2 in which I'll be talking about super objectives and the through line. Now, you might have heard someone say at one point that what does your character want? What is your character's goal? What is your character's outer motivation? Whenever they say those things, they are talking about the super objective. And it can be so difficult, especially as a young filmmaker, a young screenwriter, to fully understand this because people often use words that can be confusing. When someone says that your character needs a want, or what does your character want, they're actually talking incorrectly, because wants are mini goals and the super objective produces the wants. So when you hear someone say, what is the character's goal, what does the character want, or their outer motivation, they are specifically addressing the super objective. And it's important to understand because, like I said, wants is a process of the main character trying to achieve their super objective. It can be a very straightforward super objective that they're trying to achieve, or it can be a more complex human drama in which writers often play with the character's inner motivations and their outer motivations, and the juxtaposition and the tug of war and the cause and effect and the character arcs that they experience. All those things can make dramas complex. There are lots of things that can happen with the super objectives, but the important thing is to understand that your main character needs a super objective. One way to create complexity, and I'm including this into the foundation because it may be a bit advanced, but it's a basic foundation that writers often use. A character starts a story with a lie. What this means is you start the story automatically introducing conflict. If your character has a false belief system or believes something incorrectly or misguided ideology, there's room for improvement, or there's room for them to change, there's room for them to become a better person or not. They can reject help, they can reject whatever the things is that they need to learn and become a tragic figure. So whenever you introduce that lie, you often need a need. Now, the need is also something that people often confuse with. When you hear someone say, what does your character need? They are not talking about the super objective. The need is a writing device, it's a component in storytelling that breaks away from their lie. The need is a storytelling component that allows the main character to learn something that they never thought of, or adopt a new perspective that breaks away from the lie. Because if you don't do that, they take that lie into the third act and become a tragic figure. And the need often takes form as a climax scene in the end of the second act. It's often the lowest point that the character experiences. Sometimes when you're developing a trilogy, the first movie, the second movie, and the third movie, the climax scene in the second movie is often that need that a character experiences. This is a magnifying approach with the 3-act structure. The need is important to it's a remedy for the lie. And when you use a lie in your stories, the lie will produce the super objective. For example, maybe your character believes in order to be happy, they need to become rich. So then the super objective for that character is to become rich. But how they do that is destroying people around them, destroying friends and family, destroying businesses, self-centered, selfishness, narcissistic. They become rich, but they destroy everything. And hopefully at the end of the movie, they realize that they've lost everything and they need to change, or they need to pull themselves out of this pit of despair, and because it's now truly unhappy, unpleasant circumstance that they're trying to get out of. And when they have all the money, they realize they're not happy, they don't have friends, they don't have family, and then they realize, they actually need the companionship of a opposite sex, or they need someone that they can be friends with, and that's where the happiness is in, and not with wealth. For example, when you use a lie as a story component, starting the story with, you begin to see how effectively it can be to start throwing hurdles at your main character. When you know that your main character is believing something that is false or incorrect or that is misleading, you can literally throw them with things that they need to face or things that they need to overcome. It definitely establishes conflict from the beginning, because sometimes you can have a difficult time trying to figure out what the super objective is of the main character, and sometimes there's also trouble with figuring out conflict. If you think, for example, of The Truman Show, The Truman Show is a character that is brought up in a false reality. When the character realizes that things are not as it seems, bits and bits of pieces of his ideology gets cracked, he literally at the end of the movie opens a door to the real world. So you can see how a lie can be a positive and a negative thing that you can play around with. But this is more complex dramas. If you have a straightforward super objective that your character is pursuing and they have no need to change themselves, then you don't need to implement a lie or a need. It's just a basic foundation to understand that when you can create a complex super objectives, that writers often use these writing devices. Before I go into more in-depth analysis of the super objective, I'd like to explain to you the throughline. The throughline is a very important tool that writers use before writing the script. It helps the writer with clear direction towards what they're doing. And what the throughline does is you physically write out what is your protagonist super objective, how does your protagonist trying to achieve the super objective, what is your antagonist super objective, and how do they try to achieve that super objective. Now, it should be an automatically given that your protagonist and your antagonist super objectives are connected. When you separate those two super objectives, you are telling two different stories. I recently watched a big Hollywood movie with a $300 million budget, and the protagonist has a super objective and the villain in the story has a super objective. That's different from a protagonist. So what's happening is the protagonist is walking around the antagonist, outsmarting the antagonist, and the antagonist doesn't care. It doesn't affect him because the antagonist's super objective is different from the main character's super objective. When you do not focus your antagonist and protagonist goals or super objective, you're telling two different stories. So when you're writing this through line, it should be automatically understood that your protagonist, the thing that your protagonist is trying to achieve, is also the thing that your antagonist is trying to achieve. And very importantly is how do they try to achieve that super objective. This is the ones that I talk about, the mini goals in the story that they implement that allows them to achieve the super objective, whether they are successful or they fail at it. The next point is any other complexity or any other complication. The main complication, the main conflict is between the protagonist and the antagonist. But if you have other stories that doesn't have a clear antagonist, the complication would be that world conflict, the problem, the world problem that the character is trying to solve. It can also be secondary or tertiary characters that have other agendas that would interfere with the protagonist or the antagonist super objectives. And sometimes those characters have their own conflict with one another or things that might have a negative influence on the primary plot or the protagonist trying to achieve their super objective. The next one is the allies of the protagonist and the antagonist. Who are they? Do they have allies? And usually ones who can often help them achieve what they're trying to achieve. The next point is character arcs. I will go into depth into character arcs in the next episode, but just to understand, it's usually the character arc is that focus in how the super objective is visually portrayed. The last point is the end result. It's very beneficial to understand how your characters are ending the story. Does your main character just achieve the success without any sort of trouble, or are they supposed to sacrifice something from them that they kept dearly to themselves, their philosophy, their ideology, their perspective? It can be actually physical as well. Do they lose a limb or a hand, or what are the things that can negatively influence them in trying to achieve their super objective? It doesn't have to be that extreme or that complex, but it's important to at least understand what your story is heading towards. Some writers would often write the first draft and then see, okay, my character is ending this way. So the second draft, they would write the perspective of the antagonist, and then the third draft, they go back to the protagonist, or the third draft, they see which of the two stories are end the best the best way. And then maybe the third draft, I would go back to the protagonist and then elevate the story in multiple other ways. Other writers, including myself, would prefer to design everything beforehand, before opening final draft, before touching a word of dialogue or action, to do the brainstorming of what your main character, what your protagonist's super objective is, and how the story ends. And the through line is a beautiful tool to implement and in trying to achieve that, because it gives a writer crystal clear direction. And when you hear people say how to avoid writer's block or staring at the blank page, when you do thorough planning and investigation and brainstorming into these basic questions, these basic foundations of developing a main character and a super objective, it will be easier writing the scenes, because you will not crash and burn. You will not have writer's block, because you know what the direction is. And you can even take it further, that you scene outlines before touching a word of dialogue or writing any scenes, by creating scene outlines and having a crystal clear understanding and direction of what you're trying to do. Because when those things are displayed on a wall, for example, or on a whiteboard, and you move the index cards around, when you get to that scene, you know, okay, my character wants to do this, my character needs to do this, this is the intention, this is the obstacles, this is what the character is trying to prevent that character from doing, this is what that character is trying to achieve in this, the mini goal, the mini want. And so I can begin and start with the action and dialogue. Hopefully you understand that the through line is a tool that writers use to implement a clear direction in what is your protagonist trying to achieve, and how do they achieve it, and what is trying to stop them. And if you think about the log line is in itself that as well, where the basic understanding of a log line is that you have a special, unique main character with a crystal clear super objective, and what is the conflict, or what is the thing trying to prevent your main character of trying to achieve that super objective. That's in layman terms what a log line entails. And summaries also have to have that crystal clear understanding of what your story entails, the premise of your story, and how that super objective is being portrayed. So the second part of the video, I've devised a analysis or case study with all the films that I've watched from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. A case study of things that I've noticed when watching a lot of movies. And I encourage you as a young filmmaker or a young screenwriter to constantly watch films, old movies, especially old movies, because there's so much gold that you can obtain from movies. It's essentially a film school in itself. So I devised 3 categories. I put the content in 3 modules, and I'm calling this the super objective principalities. These aren't necessarily formulas or things that you need to copy and paste your story to, but it's principles, understanding the fundamental components of super objectives. So module A, B, and C, the difference between these 3 is that module A, the categories in module A has to do with a clear protagonist versus a clear antagonist, and with regard to the super objectives. Module B has to do with a more situational circumstance basis, what involves the super objective or the protagonist. They may not necessarily be a strong antagonist in these stories, but it's often a situational component that takes precedence. Module C is a niche, structure-based, avant-garde type of aspect to approaching the super objective. Okay, so module A, the first one what I like to call the straight arrow. This main character already knows their super objective from the beginning of the movie. They start the film already with a clear goal in what they're trying to achieve. A good example is if your character needs to reach a destination and they're already inside a vehicle on their way to that destination. Or a character that already has a treasure map and is looking for the treasure. The principle of this one is that you start the story with your main character already focused and already understanding what they are trying to achieve, and you convey that to the audience. It's probably the most common one of all these variants because it introduces the audience immediately to the story. They are hooked and they go into the journey. There's obviously other things that you need to do as well to ensure that hook, but they are interested and invested in the story from the beginning, and especially if they know that your main character already knows what they are trying to achieve. And screenwriting gurus will agree with me that this is probably the most effective one because it immediately hooks your audience. It immediately invests them into the story that you're telling. Okay, so the second one is what I call the plan B. This type of protagonist either starts with a super objective or finds a super objective, but that super objective changes maybe twice or three times in the movie. Preferably, you don't want to do it too much because then it's just like, what am I watching? But if you do it really well, it makes sense with a logical approach to cause and effect, how things and events and circumstances and plot occur, that things do change and new goals are set. Sometimes the super objective is a 180-degree flip from what it originally was, or it's the original super objective just changes into a new one that's still the same direction, but it's something different that the main character never thought of or take into consideration. If you think about Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, that's a good example of the character's super objective in the beginning is to protect the Fellowship, and when they split up, he I think it's in the second movie where he decides, okay, we need to go and fight the orcs and rescue the other characters, or that was kidnapped. So Aragorn's super objective changes, and then it changes again when uniting the the Gondor, or Rohan and Gondor in the final fight. And I think it actually changes again at the end when they take the army to the Black Gates. So you see that some characters can change their super objectives, and it's just a logical cause and effect that occurs. The third one is a character that starts off in the movie that doesn't know what they want and eventually obtain the thing that they're trying to achieve, obtain the super objective. Now, it's very important not to take too much time in establishing this, because if you take 20 or 30 minutes of screen time trying to get to the point, your audience is very smart. They're gonna get annoyed. I think screenwriting gurus will agree with me when they say, or I say that it's better that you establish your super objective in the first 10 minutes or the first 10 pages, or the first 10% if you're writing a short film or a feature film, that you need to establish it as quickly as possible. You cannot take 30 minutes of screen time with a character going around trying to figure out life. If you have a character that throughout the movie doesn't know what they are trying to achieve, maybe it's like a coming of age genre, or you have a character that, it's like an adolescent character that doesn't know what they want to do, you need to make them extremely proactive in their pursuit of finding what they're trying to achieve. And that pursuit, that proactive pursuit, becomes a focused objective goal, or the super objective. So it's important to at least engage your audience with that proactivity. But in a nutshell, you want to establish the super objective as quickly and as fast as possible in the ordinary world. Otherwise, your audience is going to wonder, what am I watching? And they're going to switch off or switch away or walk away. The fourth one is what I call "Where's my cake?" This is a protagonist that are extremely obsessed about something. It's often a thing it's often some sort of reward or something that they crave. It's a useful distraction. But what happens is they land into a situation that pulls them almost like a black hole, that pulls them into that chaos or mess that they have to sort out. If you think about like the anti-hero cowboy, they may be like, they caught a criminal, they trying to get the reward money, but the town doesn't want to give the reward money. They've got other agendas, or there's a group of bandits attacking the town. So now this main character, this anti-hero, now needs to help the town so that he gets paid. So that type of super objective can be adopted despite their obsession or the distraction that they are trying to obtain. So module B, as I've described, it's more circumstance or situation based regarding the super objectives. The first one, what I call useful sidekicks. This is a type of main character that has a super objective, but they tend to fail their quest. They tend to fail their. They come to a point where they just give up, or they come to a point where I'm defeated by the circumstances of the situation or the conflict. But their sidekicks or the secondary characters are not just extremely loyal, but they carry the same interest as their protagonists or their friends, and they try to actually help them, and even some of them accomplish the main climax, achieving the super objective for the protagonist with the same companionship, that camaraderie that they share with the protagonist. If you think about Sam, Frodo and Sam is a good example, where Frodo actually gets defeated by the spider, and Frodo doesn't even throw the ring in the fire. He actually rejects that task at hand, and he actually turns around and walks away. But Sam, if you look at Sam's character, he physically pulls Frodo on his back, and he takes that extra step. He goes that extra mile to help Frodo achieve the super objective, the task at hand, by destroying the ring. So you get those characters that are not just extremely loyal, but they understand the importance of the super objective, and they have a different or additional perspective that the main character maybe lacks, or because of the main character's extreme flaws or unfortunate circumstances, that the secondary characters can help them. The second one is what I call preoccupied minds. This is a type of super objective that is established more or less, but the characters involved are preoccupied by themselves. It can be like a love interest, so the main super objective kind of falls away. For example, if you think about like maybe two spies that's trying to obtain a secret nuclear weapon, but the situation either allows them to fail the task, or another agency perhaps gets the task done, or whatever the situation is that blocks them. Maybe they get captured. Maybe the two characters fall in love, and that becomes more important than finding the nuclear weapon. Story devices like MacGuffins are often used here, where the thing that they're trying to, the main super objective thing, doesn't become important anymore. It's more about the human connection and the component that is more character driven, that is more important than actually achieving the task at hand. The third one is what I call the dream a little dream. This is a very famous character that is often has a longing obsession, but because of their longing obsession to become a better person or a better themselves, the super objectives vary from small things to big things to enormous universal type of conflicts that they need to solve. But the longing inside the character is of such more significant than the super objective itself. Maybe it's like, for example, a family that's stuck in a wartime, and they're trying to escape the city, and the super objectives can vary in small parts, but their longing to escape oppression or whatever tyranny they experience can occur, and you see that in beautiful dramas where characters do prevail or get out of that situation that suffocates them. The next one is what I call witness to the prosecution. It's not a direct reference to the movie, but this type of character is consumed with their own flaws or problems or things, and the plot takes them on a journey that they get involved with other people's business. It's almost like the other ones that I've mentioned, but these type of characters have usually showcase their moral dilemma. It can be like a jury trying to decide the verdict of a character, and then because the main character is pushed into that circumstances that the morality gets revealed between people who judge too harshly, or people who judge without having enough evidence, or things that just out of their control. And this character often sides either on the good side or the bad side. So it's often a morality type of component, but as the icon suggests, they're in a wheelchair, and the wheelchair is moving forward and they're just along for the ride. But it's a famous movie where the character is spying on a family, and he gets sucked into the connection into that family and actually saves them at the end. They can witness another person's story and become obsessed about their troubles, and they adopt their super objectives. Flat characters are often like this. The plot moves the character if you're using a flat character, and they just go along with the ride. If you think about an action genre movie where the character is just a badass throughout and doesn't need to change, he only cares about solving their issue, but the plot is determining their actions and how the story ends. Then the last one is what I call Eye of the Beholder. This is your typical biography movie, the biopic. A majority of the times, biopics doesn't have a crystal clear antagonist or a villain. Very often, the protagonist is in that situation, in that circumstance, where they do things, or where the super objectives are not entirely 100% clear. They're either their own enemies, or they try to overcome whatever the conflict is. But biopics are often like this. There are some really, really good ones that borrows principles of Module A with biopics, but in general speaking, the standard biopic deals with real life situations. So if you're doing a movie about someone that has died in real life, or someone that it's achieved something great in real life, but if you research the life story and you adapt it to a film, it may not have crystal clear antagonists or villains that they need to compete against or fight against. It's often the situation or the circumstance in which they find themselves, and they either try to survive or they overcome the conflict that is presented to them. So Module C, this is where the niche type of structures and avant-garde type of movies comes in. So the first one is the episodic structure, where you have multiple characters, each having a super objective in the structure of the movie itself, and they have their own things. Those super objectives can be crystal clear, like the principles in Module A, but it's a episodic structure in which usually a thematic device is used to interconnect these episodes. Quentin Tarantino loves to use this type of structures, but an effective storytelling in compartmentalizing super objectives, and sometimes those super objectives are extremely theme-based, and it's connected with a stronger theme. The second one is the basic multiplot, which you have 3 characters or more that their super objectives are interconnected, intertwined, until they all 3 of them end in the climax scene or the third act, in which they get together and solve the main world conflict or the main issue. But their super objectives are uniquely separated from each other, and they eventually converge to one point. So this is a very structural component to utilizing super objectives. The next one is what I call Who Ate Goldilocks. This is your typical children's book type of nursery rhymes, because if you go and study those nursery rhymes, they are often either thematically orientated, or there's some sort of lesson that is derived from that super objective. If you think about Goldilocks, for example, it's a girl that goes into a house that a cave lived by bears, and she eats pudding. The one is cold, the one is medium, the one is too hot. Whatever the lesson is derived from that is dependent on that super objective. Then you get the concept. This is a very famous principle that most film students often struggle with. They would think of a story, they would think of a concept, and without developing that concept, they would film that concept and inevitably make a concept movie. A concept movie often lacks a clear conflict, often lacks clear antagonists or villains, the super objectives are not necessarily clear, crystal clear, and the concept is often also situational based. If you think about like an advert is a concept movie because the advert is selling the product, and whatever the visuals and story surrounding that product is to do with the concept. But filmmaking and storytelling has a far greater depth than the concept itself. When you have a concept or idea and you start implementing or introducing conflict to that concept, it becomes a story. A story without conflict is a concept. So it's a very important principle to understand, especially as a young filmmaker. And if you're making short movies for film school, that you need to think outside the box or beyond the box, because the box is important to get the concept, but more things are needed for that concept to become a story. I've seen a couple of films where students make a concept, and especially if it's a one-act concept, and they don't understand why it's not being received well. And they often think they're breaking rules or they're breaking the mold, but they are essentially making a concept movie that doesn't have legs. The last one is what I call the red flag. A red flag is essentially a main character going through a series of events, going through the script, going through the movie without having a super objective. They are not proactive. They are going through the scenes moment by moment by moment. They are chit-chatting with other people, other co-workers or friends or family. They're just chit-chatting. It's very soapy-like. They don't drive the plot at all. They don't have any goals at the beginning and they don't have any goals at the end. And the writer doesn't establish goals. It's just a character going through the moments. It's moment plus moment plus moment plus moment. There's no cause and effect. You might as well erase the main character or supplant the main character with someone else, and it doesn't matter. And I'm calling this a red flag because if you understand this principle, you can avoid it. If you have a story like that where you have a character going through 100 pages of script, not moving the story forward or not moving towards a goal, you should be aware that you're busy with a red flag. And if you understand this, you can improve your storytelling techniques and process by creating or developing a main character. Whether you use a round character or a flat character, it doesn't matter. That if your main character doesn't have a super objective, then why are you making the movie? Is it because of a famous actor? You need to ask those questions when you understand that you are dealing with a red flag. And this is the only one where I would say try to stay clear. And because I have read scripts where writers write 120 pages, the character doesn't move the story forward. They just go through the emotions like a fish going through the swimming down the stream, not up the stream. So the conflict isn't even focused on the main character in itself. And these things happen. Unfortunately, you might have a good concept and a good idea, but sometimes you would fall into that trap of creating a long, muddied, stretched out drama that isn't really a drama because there's no conflict or the character doesn't have a goal. And why do you expect the audience to be interested or invested in your movie if you're not invested in your main character? It cannot be simply because you are showcasing a person talking on screen, because that's essentially what you're doing with the red flag, is that you're just showing people talking heads. Why are you watching the movie? And it's a good principle to understand and try to avoid when creating movies. So in conclusion, I hope this all makes sense. This case study that I've made with the module A, B, and C, these are not formulas or molds to force your stories. These are just it's principles to understand what makes a super objective a super objective. And once you have that foundation, you can become more confident in your story writing approach and developing creative ideas and creative concepts that inevitably leads into compelling stories. And the process of developing a main character is that they need to have some sort of objective. And like I've explained in the first episode, if you focus your protagonist, they proactively in pursuit of a super objective, you will automatically hook your audience. There are other things that you can connect to this, like likability and empathy and those things. I will discuss them in a later episode. But understand that your story need to have a super objective. Otherwise, it's not a film. And if you really go and think about the famous movies that you like yourself, you will automatically remember the super objective. It will stand out like a sore thumb. Hollywood has this weird fascination with not understanding these basics, so they would spend $300 million on a movie, and when it doesn't do well, they blame the audience. And I will never understand that philosophy. It makes no sense when the writers, Hollywood writers, don't understand the basics and don't employ these basic foundations in developing main characters or compelling stories, that they blame the audience. And please do not become that writer. That you need to take care, your own responsibility in understanding the foundations and implementing basics, screenwriting basics, so that you can write compelling stories. At the end of the day, you want people to watch your movie, and you want to get paid, and you want to sell the product that you're making. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. I see you in the next episode.